want to welcome everyone to this is the first of our Meet the Funder sessions. So this has been part of the festival for at least a couple of years now. David, I know you've done it for a couple of years at least. And my name is Kevin Duggan. I'm the Director of Development for Games for Change, and I've worked with the organization for quite a number of years. And my primary responsibility is fundraising. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about in these sessions is how to access the resources to make games and immersive media for social impact. And it's a really wonderful opportunity, I think, to have this sort of one-on-one, virtual one-on-one with folks who are really doing that kind of work, who are making those kinds of projects possible. And it spans the nonprofit sector, the government agencies, and the for-profit impact investing world. And so it's a great chance to hear directly from those folks and then ask them some questions. Just some housekeeping about this. So first of all, for the presentation, you can double click and Hopin should allow you to enlarge a screen, whether it's the speaker or the presentation, by double clicking on the window. That should work. So what we're going to do is have the presentation, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. For these sessions, because they're short, they're basically half an hour, we're going to keep the Q&A to the chat section, text chat. And I would actually invite people to hold your questions till the end of the presentation, so we don't end up with like a super huge queue that we have to go back and sort through. And David has suggested that there's a possibility of him staying a little bit late if there's a lot of questions in the queue. And also, Hopin does allow you to direct message folks through the People tab. I haven't tried this myself, but apparently you can do that. And I think David would be open to responding to those, or email, and he'll tell you exactly the best way to reach him outside of this session. And so I'll also ask you, when you type your question, please obviously try and keep it brief, specific, relevant. We'll just try and get through as many of those as we possibly can. And again, hope you'll bear with us as we find our way through this virtual world. All right, so without further ado, I just want to introduce Dave. So Dr. Dave Miller is Program Officer at the National Institutes of Health National Cancer Institute. And that's the US government's largest funder of cancer research and technologies. And as I learned from reading this bio, Dave is a computational physicist, which I would love to hear more about in another time and place. But I think more relevant to this is he maintains a grants portfolio, which encompasses mathematical modeling, data visualization, and interactive media development and research. And I believe that encompasses games and maybe some immersive media projects as well. Not sure, but we'll hear more. So I'm going to disappear. Dave is going to take over, share his presentation, then I'll come back for our Q&A in 10 minutes or so. Take it away, Dave.
All right, thank you, Kevin. I'm going to share my screen and make this full screen, and you can choose whichever window you'd like to maximize. I'm also going to be reading from notes, so you may see me glancing off the screen as well. So as Kevin said, I'm David Miller. I'm a program director at the National Institutes of Health, the federal government's primary agency for funding biomedical and health science research. And I work primarily at the National Cancer Institute, which is one of the 27 institutes and centers that make up the NIH. So in previous years, I would sort of talk at length about various examples of NIH-funded games and media. However, this year, I'd like to really dive right into how to interact more directly with NIH program directors. It's really our job to help you decide on your best path forward for applying for federal funding at the NIH, and there's quite a few of us. So sometimes it can be difficult to navigate and know where to start. The NIH funds scientific research into understanding human health across the full range of scientific study. So from basic biology to disease prevention research, the development of new medical treatments and health impacts on individuals, families, and whole populations. I'm using an NCI graphic here, but really this range and sort of granularity is similar across all of NIH. All of these areas that you see here are broadly amenable, though, to using games as instruments for data analysis, data collection, as well as therapeutics, behavior modification, health education interventions, and so on, all depending upon the goals of your proposed research. So if you have interest in submitting a proposal to develop a research game, as I like to call them, the most important advice I can really give you is to talk to your program director. She or he is your best avenue toward understanding how any particular part, any particular institute of the NIH is currently funding research. If you're planning to develop a game addressing cancer, particularly cancer biology, then I might actually be the right person at NIH for you to talk to. More likely, though, you're interested in addressing some other aspect of human health, mental health, and so you'll need to identify a program director with appropriate expertise elsewhere within the agency. Now, depending upon the health area that you choose, there's a relevant NIH institute. Recall that the NIH consists of 27 institutes and centers. I managed to fit about half of the older legacy logos here, and you can see how each institute has its own health research focus. Each institute maintains program director contact information on their website. However, you can always feel free to reach out to me for an introduction to someone anywhere across the NIH if you've already found them, or you can even ask me to help you locate someone, as I maintain a list of contacts for folks that are familiar with game development and interactive media. When you do this, I would strongly encourage you to put together a one-page description of the research that you would like to pursue, essentially a summary of your project goals, which the NIH calls aims, your research team and collaborators, the resources that you have, especially any data sets or unique methods that you'd like to use, and a very rough notion of what you believe this research project would cost. Is this a $100,000 project that takes a year, or is this a multi-million-dollar project that would take 3, 4, 5 years to complete? Having that, your program director will be able to then help you decide what NIH funding opportunities might be a good fit for your proposal. By far, the most common research proposals are so-called investigator-initiated research, which means that you, the applicant, completely identify the scope and the details of your research plan. These applications, these proposals, are then separately referred to an appropriate NIH institute. They're peer-reviewed, and each is based upon its own merits. There are many sizes of such grants, but the most common are R21s, which are small 2-year awards, and R01s, which are larger 5-year awards. Applicants can be from universities, from companies, nonprofits, non-government organizations, and state and local government entities. So there's really not much of a restriction on where you're submitting from. And both US-based and international applicants are generally eligible to apply for NIH funding. Contrast this, however, with more targeted funding calls that are put out by individual institutes. So as an example, my colleague Tony Beck leads this program here that funds health-relevant STEM education games and instructional software. His program targets just K through 12 grades and is limited to just small business applicants, which is defined rather broadly. And I'll give his contact information out later on. Since this program is rather unique, Tony's hosting an SBIR grant, so that's Small Business Innovation Research, grant writing workshop for this program at the end of the month. And details can be found at the NIHCEPA.org website or at a link that I'll put in the chat here. Also, there are many NIH funding programs that may be of interest to game developers, even without a sort of explicit targeting of funding games in particular. So for instance, my institute, the NCI's ITCR program, funds the development of biomedical software across the full software development lifecycle. So from simple algorithms up through very, very large, many user software tools. This program does not specifically target game development, but many of the data management and methods development challenges that exist for developing video games also exist for biomedical research. And so a method that you developed to overcome some technical challenge may very well also be applicable to similar technical challenges in biomedical research. And we encourage folks to apply their skills and expertise and techniques toward solving challenges within the biomedical health research space. So I'll leave you with this contact slide, and I've included Tony's contact information as well. We're both always happy to talk with new potential applicants interested in the use of games for biomedical research. And with the time remaining, I'm happy to answer any questions. And as we said, we'll take questions from the chat. I don't know if there's an easy way for me to leave this up, so I'm going to swap over to the other window.
Right. Maybe you want to stop.
Yeah, I think I'll stop sharing.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Great. Thank you. Yeah. So, folks, please feel free to type in your questions into the chat field, and we'll start feeling those. Well, I'm going to start with a question actually while we wait for a minute. And so, one takeaway for me is, wow, there seems like there's a lot of opportunities. It's confusing, right? There's a lot to sort of parse there. And I think it's great that you've sort of offered yourself as a point of entry, I think, particularly for the NIH. So if someone has a game project or an immersive media project, or if they think is relevant, particularly on a research front, it sounds like you're a good point of contact, and then you can figure out where they might want to go, or if there's a colleague of yours who might be better to talk to.
Yeah, it's very unlikely that I'll be the person that eventually, if you do decide to submit something, that it will come to me. It's much more likely that I'll know a person, or even I'll know a person who will know the person. When you're dealing with a federal agency with 10,000 employees across, all of biomedical research, it can, take a little bit just to find the right person.
Right. So that actually leads me to part two of the question. Can you also refer people to opportunities outside of your agency because you're sort of well versed in, I wouldn't say expert, but you're certainly aware of other opportunities across the federal government?
Absolutely. As you can imagine, we're sort of a rare batch of folks here in Washington, D.C. that are very interested in serious games and games for education. So, sometimes folks will come to me with a game that, while it is biomedically relevant, it's much more about the educational aspects, and might actually be relevant to say something at the Department of Education as a classroom educational technology. So I might refer them to my friend Ed Metz, who I believe is giving another one of these later today. Later on, yeah.
He's on today, yeah.
Yeah, so Ed, myself, Mark Ruppel, Lakita, we all interact quite frequently. And in fact, there's a so-called Federal Games Guild that meets every month or so to sort of interact and chat about how our programs are faring and how we're seeing federal funding going forward within the game space.
Great. So we see we have a couple of questions in the chat queue. David, do you want to field them?
Absolutely. So maybe I'll start with, I think the first one I see here is from Matthew Fisher. How competitive are NIH game-related grants? So I will say it really depends upon the individual institute, and that's a great conversation to have with your program director. Most institutes will publish or make everyone aware of what's called sort of a pay line. So for instance, the NCI, my institute right now, is pretty competitive for applications. Generally about 10 to 15% of applications are funded in any given year. And that's not due to any kind of parsimonious nature of us. In fact, I would say the NCI has the largest pool of funds to draw from, but we also have by far the largest number of applications. So in terms of, the amount of money you have and then the number of applications that you get every year, that fraction can go down if the number in the denominator goes up. Specifically to game related grants, it really depends. In the educational space, or for example, that SEPA program that I pointed out there, perhaps half of all those applications that are funded are in games. Whereas other areas, like say you're doing biomedical data analysis that uses a games modality, those are a little bit less frequently seen. How many applications do you receive versus how many are funded? So I think I just answered that. It really depends, though. Like I said, other institutes might have 25% success rate or even higher.
I know that just the National Endowment for Humanities just had a call for proposals, and they only funded 13%. And which seems on one hand like a terrible number for an applicant. But we understand these are almost always very competitive process. And I think that's also a great argument for being in touch with you in advance, to try and have the relationship with the program officer to make sure that your proposal is appropriate, competitive, and has a shot.
Yes, and because the NIH uses a peer review process, I, as a program director, am not involved in that review process at all. Right. So I'm able to interact with you, an applicant, at all points other than within that sort of thin peer review process. So everything from your initial idea to developing your application to submitting it to navigating various funding opportunities, and even then after review. Let's say you do pretty well, but not quite well enough to be funded that first time. You can work with your program director to make some revisions and resubmit. And actually, resubmissions have a significantly higher success rate than initial submissions as well, simply because you're responding directly to your initial peer review comments that you get.
So patience and persistence,
yes, and
can be rewarded.
Yes, I would say, since this question usually comes up, there's a lot of incentives for wanting to go this route because, unlike VC or other type of funding, once you secure federal grant funding, it's very, very hands-off. I check in on you essentially once a year just to see how your progress is going. And you may or may not even have sort of specific milestones to go through. It's just an expectation. You have the research vision for your research project, and so you know the best course and timeline to take. That said, from time of application to time of getting an award, if you're successful, can sometimes be upwards of about a year. And so that may not fit your particular business model that you have, or in the fast-paced iterative game design world, a year might be just too long for your initial idea to be relevant still. Should we move on to another question? Okay. Thank you, David. Is there a site where you can look up available grants and opportunities at NIH? Absolutely. So if you go to nih.gov, and then I believe it's funding opportunities, it will show you the full, vast, really searchable trove of various funding opportunities that you can do. There's also lots of resources that you can go through for finding funding opportunities quite generally. So, for instance, Lucian Parsons, who runs the Maverick Consortium, will send out, I think, monthly funding opportunity announcements and things like that are available just for XR and VR type proposals as well. There's no way to sort of subscribe to any particular type of funding opportunity other than to say, I want to create an alert for game or game development or interactive media. Sometimes some institutes may use slightly different language than what you might expect. So you may see words that, gamification or interactive media or rich media, that sort of thing. Just think of lots of different names for things because, some institutes, they might have some restrictions on how they're able to use the funding. And so they might have to use a bit of language to work within the parameters that they're assigned for making awards in particular areas. That said, for submitting an investigator-initiated research project, there's really no restrictions around it. It's really your best vision, and I would still encourage you to interact with the program director.
Okay, I think Frank has a question.
Can you speak to why there's so much interest in games within NIH? So I will say I have a lot of interest in games within NIH. I would say it's not a common thing for people to see. That said, though, as a research modality, just like artificial intelligence, mathematical modeling, data visualization, games are unique conduit toward addressing biomedical problems and challenges. So, for instance, I'd seen past successes with Foldit and iWire and Eterna and other video games that do biomedical data analysis. So that's a really, really interesting area that I feel is sort of underexplored and frankly underappreciated within the biomedical research community. So I'm acting, as much as a program director, I'm also acting sort of as an internal advocate for areas of science that I feel are important and overlooked. Now, granted, all program directors are doing that sort of thing. So everyone is trying to push areas of science that they see as important, and it's based upon our expertise within particular areas. That said, we all work together to really fund the best science possible, and that is rock solidly built upon peer review. So when you write an application, you're not trying to convince me that your idea is great. If you're working with me, I'm already going to think your idea is great, and I just want to help you put your best foot forward. Your goal is to demonstrate to essentially peers. Now, that is not just game developers. If, say, you're creating a cancer game, you're going to have to work with a cancer researcher or an oncologist or an epidemiologist. You're going to need to work with additional, patient advocates or, technical experts in, interactive media or whatever else. So really, it's about the collaboration that you're putting together, and then the importance and significance of the health and biomedical research problem that you're trying to attack. Let's see here.
Tony has a question.
Tony, you're creating a hybrid project. I don't know that would fit at NIH. However, with the historical sites that you mentioned, that might be something to talk to Eric Ruppel about, and he's speaking later on, and I'm sure that you can go through, since he works in humanities and creations of cultural heritage, that might be a good one for to chat about with him.
May also be for Lakita Edwards from the NEA, depending. They may be seen as a creative arts project.
Yeah, if there's an artistic point to it, or if there's a classroom education component to it, you could also talk to Tony, Ed Metz as well.
Lakita, yeah, and Ed Metz, yeah.
Let's see here. Oh, thank you for the private message. That was to Nimra. Sorry. Okay, I don't see any other specific questions, but are any more general things?
I have a question, which is, actually, first of all, I wonder if there's a project that you want to mention that's been funded through NIH that might be familiar to this audience, that you think is sort of exemplary in terms of putting games in service of either research. And I'm not sure in your presentation whether you talked much about sort of public health education, and maybe that's not something so much an NIH focus versus research.
So it absolutely is. And in fact, that program announcement that I mentioned that my colleague Tony Beck is running, right. You're absolutely able to submit health literacy type classroom education applications. That is specific to K-12, but of course you can submit those type of applications to the same institute. It just won't be a part of that specific science education program, that he runs. Like I said, with investigator-initiated applications, you can really come up with any type of health and biomedically relevant goal that you'd like to. And by the way, this isn't just patients. This can be for families of patients. The mental health strain and really the physical health strain on families of people who are seriously ill. Is an important topic. How health impacts entire populations is an important area of research. And so there's a whole, subset of our institution that's dedicated to that. Sometimes, again, things sort of have odd names for historical reasons. So, for instance, how cancer affects populations or, impacts populations is called cancer control for reasons that I really don't understand. But it's sort of historically why. So if you ever have an idea and you're looking it up, you can't quite find it, again, just contact someone and just describe, again, with that one pager, it's really helpful for program directors to get a sense of what you're trying to do. Obviously, there's often a sort of language barrier because, everyone at NIH is going to be a scientist at heart. And so there may be a bit of back and forth to get a rhythm to really get on the same page. But once you do, it's absolutely every program director's goal to help you put your best foot forward with an application to the NIH.
So actually, let's just jump back into the chat queue. I see there's 2 more questions there.
Okay, Adrienne. So let's go for Adrienne Mackey. I've created a game that encourages new and more diverse players to get out to nature centers in the region I live in. It's based on research that shows, yes. So that's a possibility for that. It depends upon if you're focusing on any particular age group. And it also depends on how you're putting that together as a research project, right? So applying to build a tool that does a thing is an important step. So that might be 1 or 2 aims of a research project. You would definitely need a validation aim though as well. I want to do a study where I have some core group go out and use the app in nature, and then I'll have another group who maybe they don't use the app and they just go for a walk in nature or go for a walk in an urban setting, that sort of thing. So some type of, validation study to show that, whatever health benefit or whatever, beneficial outcomes from your intervention is due to the application itself. It's those type of details and nuance that will really help set an application above, the other 80% of folks who are applying, and pushes you up into what you might call a fundable range.
So I think the second part of her question, though, is, as an artist, how does she, to get the additional capacity, the research capacity that she might need to be successful, well, how does she go about that? And I know that in another context at Games for Change, we spoke to a program officer at a federal agency, and she actually made introductions for us to other organizations that could do the kind of research that would help our project. Is that something that you could do? Can you make those kinds of referrals, or are there general? Can you point someone like her to a resource that could help her make those connections?
I can certainly help point folks. Unlike some other agencies like DARPA or the Department of Energy, we as program directors aren't really so much matchmakers for folks. So, a lot of the effort in finding folks to work with, you might have to go to a biomedical health conference or a child health and development conference, something along those lines, to help find partners who are interested in this. That said, my understanding, when I go to Games for Change or when I go to, other game development conferences, I often will bump into folks that are already in the biomedical health space to begin with, who are interested in doing these things as well. So that type of networking is a certain amount of you, doing the shoe work to find folks to interact with. The other part then, of course, is, local meetups and conferences and things that you can go to as well.
So Russell has a question.
Narrative video game about deaths of your mother. My condolences. So 2 members of your family died. It covers themes of caregiving, dying, grief. Are these mental health games something that NIH grants may cover? Potentially, and I'll follow up on that, Lone. On your link there. I'll follow up on that. Potentially, it depends on if your game is meant as some form of educational tool or therapeutic, and then it depends on if you're, again, targeting a particular age group, or if you're or if it's actually meant for healthcare workers. So healthcare workers often aren't so accustomed to, as a clinician or as a nurse, your focus is on patient care, or a curative touch, and might not necessarily be about helping them with sort of other aspects of a family's experience surrounding a patient. So depending on what targeted part of that you think that your narrative video game might be able to address, it would really depend. So I had my email address up earlier, and I'm going to put it up again, the chat here.
Great.
And anyone is welcome to send me a gist of what you're thinking of putting together. So Russell, for example, just using you as an example, I would probably connect you with a couple of colleagues at the National Institute of Mental Health, and then also possibly Child Health and Development Institute. And then there is a part of the NCI, my institute, that again deals with sort of survivorship and families of patients who are terminally ill or who have died. And there's a possibility that there might be something for you to develop there. That said, I will say very strongly, and I really can't emphasize this enough, applications that are purely on the technical side, in other words, this is the game, and it's just, I want to put it out in the world for people to use and enjoy and benefit from. That's wonderful, but the NIH doesn't fund games. It doesn't really even fund tools. It funds biomedical research. So there needs to then be some study involved with the game or the tool to demonstrate the efficacy of what you've built.
So technically our time is up, and that means I have to go. So I'm going to thank David for his time and for joining us, and thank you all for joining us. David,
I'm happy to stick around
a little bit more
for a few more questions, and so you don't need to rush out quite yet, although the lineup this year is really phenomenal, so I'm looking forward to seeing some of the other talks that we have.
So David will stay for a little bit longer, and then Dave, I think you just click leave when you're ready to go.
Okay.
After you've answered whatever you want to answer. And I want to invite folks back. So we have 2 more Meet the Funder sessions today. The next one's at 12:30 with Harry Hamer of London Venture Partners, which is a completely different look, different type of approach. So it's game specific. As far as I know, it's one of the few venture programs specifically about games. And then in the afternoon, we have Ed Metz, who's sort of a peer of Dave's, really from the education side. So for many of you, that should be an interesting session as well. So thanks again. I hope you enjoy the festival. And Dave, thanks again for your time.
Thanks so much, Kevin. I've enjoyed the process.
Thank you, everyone. Yep.
So Nancy, actually, I can get to your question. You say curious on what stands out for reviewers, and then you actually answer your own question. Are they looking for evidence-based tools and games? So the answer is yes. If you're developing a game, you need to demonstrate, why are you choosing the game route? Why couldn't this just be done with, an informational website or, heavens, a pamphlet, right? Hopefully the reasons are obvious. But to, a room of 40 people reviewing an application, yours is probably going to be stacked up of lots of other things, including, websites and pamphlets. So you need to demonstrate why the team you've put together, and then the science, evidence-based, highly cited research that backs up what you are proposing to put forward. Let's see here. Thank you for the follow-up email. So Jason, you wrote, what about mental disorder simulator type programs? Survive the world in the mind of a schizophrenic. So I could direct you to some folks at NIH. There are tools that are meant to simulate diseases and conditions and pathologies. Sometimes those are used for training of clinicians. So for instance, I'm forgetting the group, but they created a VR application that simulates both macular like eye degeneration and glaucoma and such, and also Alzheimer's at the same time. And from sort of a serious games perspective, you would think, oh well, this is a game that's meant to develop empathy in the player. But from a biomedical research perspective, this is a game or an interactive experience that is meant to train and educate a practitioner in what a person or a patient or even their family members are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, right? And that may help doctors and physicians and even medical students in training learn how to be better within their medical profession. So the answer is yes, those do exist. As to what would be the efficacy of something like that in terms of a biomedical sense, I would have no idea. You'd have to talk to a program director to see if those type of things have been done before. And then of course, it's really up to you as an applicant to demonstrate that, hey, there is an efficacy for this. And we have some initial data that we pulled together showing that this actually could work really, really well. So I don't see any more. I'm going to go back through the links here. I don't see any more. This session has been recorded. So my understanding is this will be put up in a couple weeks, I believe on the YouTube channel once these are all edited down. And I think we are all set. So if you missed any of the contact information, by all means, you can click on my face under the people link. Probably email is the best way to get into contact with me. And yes, all of our institute directors, including Dr. Anthony Fauci, we are all very happy to be working for at this time. So thank you all for coming in. I know I didn't mention COVID specifically, but obviously that is an important key area that the NIH is very, very interested in as well. And there are, when you go in and search through funding opportunities at the NIH website, there are a number of sort of, I wouldn't quite say emergency, but sort of faster paced funding opportunities that can be awarded a little bit more quickly for sort of emerging areas, similar to how it was done years ago for the AIDS crisis, is also being done now for the current novel coronavirus pandemic. So thank you, everyone.